On a winter evening in 1843, Mary Morris sat in a cold office on Harley Street, sifting through hundreds of petitions from ladies of impeccable upbringing who were now threatened with starvation. This woman witnessed the collapse of thousands of lives as high social status and knowledge of foreign languages crashed against the harsh reality of the economic system. At stake were the lives of those who, just yesterday, had dictated fashion and etiquette in London's finest mansions, only to find themselves today on the threshold of a workhouse. Watch the video to the end and you'll learn why a brilliant education became a curse and why the only way out lay hidden behind the high walls of a special London shelter. What I'm about to show you has long remained outside the scope of official historical chronicles and the grand portraits of that great era. You'll see the true underbelly of London's high society, where intellect and loyalty were often valued less than the work of an ordinary footman or cook. The hidden truth that everyone keeps silent about lies in the brutal laws of survival for the educated class, who could not afford to make even the slightest mistake. We will reveal the secret for which many women of the past spent their last savings trying to buy a one-way ticket to the Australian colonies. These historical facts will completely overturn your perception of the noble traditions of good old England. In this investigation, we'll examine in detail not only the dry facts, but also the fates of real historical figures who defied an indifferent system. A sweeping picture will unfold before your eyes of the creation of the first social institutions that replaced the state pension for single, aging female workers. Viewers will be immersed in the atmosphere of bureaucratic battles, where the right to a modest annuity was wrested through complex voting procedures involving wealthy trustees. This is not merely a story of social injustice, but a tale of incredible human resilience, diplomatic talent, and the ability to find a way out of the most hopeless situations. Every decision made by the central characters in this narrative became an important step toward creating an entirely new form of social protection. In the mid-19th century, the status of an educated female companion was considered the only acceptable means of earning a living for an unmarried woman from an impoverished family. The 1851 census recorded 21,000 such workers in England, deprived of any social guarantees or protection from the state. These women possessed the manners of aristocrats and played the piano beautifully, yet they were not even permitted to dine at the same table as their employers. Mary Morris, who devoted her life to studying this phenomenon, described this paradoxical situation as deep isolation in the midst of a bustling crowd. The life of such a domestic worker consisted of an endless series of strict rules and unspoken prohibitions. She did not belong to the class of ordinary servants, so cooks and maids treated her with obvious suspicion and alienation. At the same time, the household's owners never considered her their equal, constantly reminding her of her dependent status as a hired employee. She spent most of her time in her room, which was often unheated, unable to join the guests in the parlor. This social divide created incredible psychological pressure, which only intensified over the years and eroded her sense of self. The financial aspect of the situation was even more disheartening and unfair, given her level of qualifications. The average salary was about £20 sterling a year, which was significantly less than the income of a qualified butler. From these meager funds, a woman was expected to purchase clothing befitting her status, as well as books and materials to maintain her own level of education. Saving money for old age on such an income was practically an impossible mathematical task, requiring miraculous frugality. Any unexpected expense or delay in salary payments instantly put the worker on the brink of financial ruin. In her diaries, Mary Morris described in detail how this system broke even the strongest and most talented women of the era. Young women from the families of impoverished clergymen, officers, and bankrupt merchants came into other people's homes hoping to be treated with respect. Instead, they faced the whims of their employers, constant nitpicking, and the need to hide any personal emotions. Fatigue built up over the years, transforming energetic young women into exhausted figures with hollow eyes and chronic insomnia. The absence of a professional union or guild left them completely defenseless against any breaches of contract by their employers. Their work schedule rarely left time for a personal life, correspondence with relatives, or simply rest. The day began early in the morning and ended only after all the employer's demands had been fully met. Constant stress led to vision problems from reading in poor lighting and back problems from sitting for hours on end at the sewing machine. The Victorian system of labour hiring did not provide for any paid vacation or sick leave whatsoever. I'd be very interested to hear your perspective. What do you think about this form of social isolation amid outward prosperity? Please share your thoughts in the comments. Guess what happened next when age began to take its toll on these tireless workers? As soon as a woman turned 50, her position in society changed drastically and irrevocably. Employers preferred to have young, energetic individuals in their homes rather than weary women in declining health. The search for a new job turned into an endless string of humiliating rejections and polite but cold letters. A society that had relied on their knowledge just yesterday now simply turned its back, unwilling to acknowledge the problem. The most terrifying situation was the sudden death of their only loyal employer, who had guaranteed their stability. Under the Victorian legal system, female white-collar workers had no long-term contracts or legal protection against sudden dismissal. After the will was read, the new owners of the mansion immediately conducted an audit of expenses and laid off excess staff. The heirs rarely assumed any obligation to support an elderly employee, preferring simply to show her the door. As compensation, the woman was usually paid a minimal severance package, which was barely enough to cover a cab fare to the nearest cheap hotel. Losing a roof over her head was accompanied by an even more serious blow to her professional reputation. Without a fresh letter of recommendation written personally by the head of a respected family, the doors of respectable households would close to her forever. Once outside their familiar, comfortable world, these 50-year-old women quickly spent their meager savings on cheap rented rooms. They had to leave the fashionable West End and move to the poor neighbourhoods of East London, where the rules of survival were entirely different. Most of them simply had no relatives capable of providing financial support due to the extreme poverty of their own families from the start. These women's fathers were often bankrupt merchants or clergymen who had left no capital behind. Therefore, they had to rely solely on what remained of their salaries, which dwindled at an alarming rate when paying for even the most modest boarding house. Mary Morris and her colleagues were the first to grasp the scale of this quiet social catastrophe, hidden from the public eye. On the streets of the British capital in the 1840s, one could encounter many well-spoken women begging for alms in the purest French. Pride and a distinguished upbringing long prevented these women from seeking open support from charitable organizations. Many preferred to endure hardship in the absolute silence of their small rooms, carefully concealing their poverty from former colleagues and high-ranking acquaintances. Fear of public humiliation forced them to maintain the appearance of prosperity, even when they had no money left to buy warm clothes. This voluntary seclusion only exacerbated the tragic plight of the educated class in the Victorian capital. By analysing census data, Maurice realised the systemic nature of the problem, which went beyond a mere series of personal misfortunes. The empire's economic structure methodically exploited intellectual resources and then simply discarded them as surplus to requirements. This invisible crisis demanded immediate and well-organized intervention by influential public figures. Without the creation of fundamentally new protective mechanisms, the streets of London would inevitably have become the final refuge for thousands of talented women. The transition from a respected employee in a wealthy household to the status of a city beggar occurred with alarming speed. Just a few months without work, a couple of unpaid bills, and creditors would put a trunk full of books and dresses up for auction. Having lost the last vestiges of her former status, a woman was also deprived of any hope of returning to society. The question is, where exactly did these people, broken by fate, go when all doors were finally slammed shut? In the next chapter, you'll learn which grim government institution became the final stop on their life's journey. When all her savings had vanished and she had nothing left to pawn, the doors of a Victorian workhouse opened to the 50-year-old woman. This institution was established by the government not to provide a comfortable refuge for the poor, but to make receiving assistance as unpleasant an experience as possible. The architecture of these gloomy brick buildings resembled that of a prison, with high walls and tiny windows that let in no sunlight. Strict rules were enforced here, completely stripping people of what little personal dignity and free will they had left. Upon admission to a London workhouse, new residents underwent a mandatory registration procedure and rigorous sanitary treatment. Behind the institution's heavy oak doors, new arrivals handed over all their personal belongings to the inspectors, including cherished letters and valuable books. In exchange for their confiscated clothing, they were issued a coarse uniform made of cheap, undyed cloth, identical for all residents of the women's ward. The standard outfit consisted of a shapeless cotton dress, a thick apron, and a simple bonnet that completely covered the hair. For a former governess who had spent her entire life paying close attention to manners and appearance, donning this government-issued uniform was an act of profound moral destruction. Within the cold brick walls of the shelter, all social and intellectual differences among the residents were instantly erased. An educated lady with an excellent command of foreign languages found herself sitting on the same narrow bench as illiterate city beggars and former female offenders. The state welfare system deliberately designed these conditions so that maximum discomfort would serve as a reliable incentive to seek any kind of work outside the facility. The residents were strictly forbidden from decorating their sleeping quarters or keeping items from their past lives. Long rows of identical iron cots in huge communal dormitories underscored the absolute loss of individuality for each resident. The daily routine at the workhouse resembled the strict regimen of a military camp, with early wake-up calls signalled by the warden's bell. Regardless of age or former status, all women were required to meet a set daily quota of physical labour. Their most common task was unravelling old, tarred ship's ropes into tow for the needs of the British Navy. For hands accustomed to the keys of an expensive grand piano and delicate silk embroidery, this rough, mechanical process required an incredible amount of effort. Performing monotonous tasks for hours on end in poorly ventilated workshops quickly led to complete exhaustion. Meals at the institution were subject to strict regulations, with cooks weighing each portion to the nearest ounce. The staple of the daily diet was watery oatmeal, served early in the morning in standard tin bowls. At lunchtime, the inmates were offered a hard piece of bread of dubious quality and watered-down cheese broth. Meals were eaten at long wooden tables in a huge cold dining hall under the watchful eye of the guards on duty. Any conversation during meals was strictly forbidden, so hundreds of people ate in an oppressive, utterly dead silence. It was especially difficult for educated women to endure the forced architectural segregation of people into strict categories. The building was designed to completely isolate the men's, women's, and quarantine wards from one another with high, solid walls. For a lonely governess, this meant a constant immersion in an environment of street vagrants, without the slightest hope of intellectual conversation. In these wards, no one understood her proper literary speech, shared her aesthetic values, or took an interest in books. The lack of access to fresh newspapers and the ban on keeping personal journals completely cut these women off from their familiar cultural world. Mary Morris, who regularly visited such London institutions on official inspection tours, meticulously documented this process of decline. In her reports, she described the lifeless eyes of her former colleagues, sitting silently on long benches in corridors whitewashed with lime. Women who had once set the trends in manners in the capital's finest salons were now afraid to even look up at the inspectors. Intelligence, knowledge of history, and social etiquette, once valued as highly as gold, had absolutely no practical significance here. While saving a person from starvation on the streets, this state apparatus completely erased their unique personality and professional pride. It was practically impossible to escape the workhouse in old age. The system sucked people in, robbing them of their last physical strength and any motivation to fight for their future. The walls of this state-run purgatory became silent witnesses to the fading of thousands of brilliant minds of the Victorian era. This grim fate seemed inevitable for most, until a group of concerned individuals decided to challenge the system itself. In the next section, we'll explore how a private initiative was able to stand up to the state's machine of indifference. What they found in the old archives from 1843 completely changes our understanding of social mutual aid in the past. That year, Reverend David Lang and Mary Morris joined forces to establish the Institute for the Relief of Governesses. Their plan was incredibly ambitious. They wanted to build an independent financial structure capable of replacing the government pension. The office on Harley Street became a veritable rescue headquarters, where hundreds of letters began pouring in from all corners of the British Empire. This was the first open acknowledgement in history of the fact that educated female wage earners needed systematic protection. David Lang possessed phenomenal organisational talent and an outstanding ability to attract the attention of the wealthiest patrons in Victorian London. He regularly organised lavish charity dinners at prestigious clubs, bringing industrialists and aristocrats together at the same table. In the social salons of Mayfair, his impassioned speeches on the need to create a fundamentally new system of social support were a constant feature. At the same time, this tireless priest sent out thousands of letters to influential lords, detailing the economic benefits of a stable market for skilled workers. His strategic vision enabled him to transform the abstract sympathy of the wealthy public into actual financial contributions to the accounts of the newly established fund. At the same time, Mary Morris took on the most difficult and emotionally draining part of the work within the small office. Every day, she held personal meetings with dozens of applicants, carefully verifying their employment histories and references from former employers. Based on these interviews, precise lists were compiled of the women most in need, with detailed descriptions of their professional careers and the reasons for their dismissal. The Institute proposed a completely new, revolutionary, for the mid-19th century, multi-tiered model of social assistance. First, a fund for temporary financial support was successfully launched for those who found themselves in critical life situations. It provided small amounts of cash for emergency purchases of basic food supplies, to pay housing debts, or to buy a presentable outfit for a job interview. Second, under the Institute's auspices, a specialized savings bank was opened, protected against any financial fraud. The third and most ambitious area of work was a large-scale campaign to build up an untouchable capital fund. Lang developed a rigorous mathematical model that made it possible to calculate the amount of monthly payments based on the accumulated principal. This entire complex system was intended to permanently block any path leading former employees to the doors of a state workhouse. Resistance from high society during the Institute's early years proved to be truly immense and fierce. Many wealthy employers openly declared that such organized charity only corrupted domestic servants. However, Lang and Morris did not back down in the face of criticism, methodically shifting public opinion through leading print publications. They began publishing anonymous but entirely true stories of catastrophic poverty that shocked the regular readers of London's morning newspapers. These dry, factual reports irrefutably proved that the real cause of poverty lay in the fundamental flaws of the wage system itself. Readers finally realized that even with the utmost frugality, it was mathematically impossible to save money for old age on a typical salary. Trust in the fund grew with each passing day, and every donation, even the most modest, was carefully recorded in the thick ledgers at the Harley Street office. The success of the first phase of fundraising made it possible to consider a project that had seemed like science fiction just a few years earlier. Lang and Morris decided that cash payments alone were not enough to ensure a dignified retirement. People who had devoted their best years to other families needed a real home, a safe haven in the harsh world of London's economy. This idea required the mobilization of all the Foundation's resources and incredible diplomatic skill. In the next chapter, you'll learn how this grand architectural project became a reality, defying all the skeptics' predictions. The secret is often hidden in the architectural plans of ordinary buildings. In 1849, a unique institution opened in Kentishtown, in North London, the home for elderly governesses. It was not a faceless government facility, but an elegant brick building designed with all the needs of elderly, educated ladies in mind. Every brick in this house was paid for with private donations collected by David Lang and his team over the course of several years. The shelter's opening was a grand event, symbolizing a return to respect for those whom society had tried to forget. The interior layout of the shelter was radically different from the forbidding corridors of workhouses. Each resident was given a separate, well-lit room that she could furnish with her own belongings, saved from auctions. The building featured spacious common lounges with plush armchairs, a well-stocked library, and even a music room with a tuned grand piano. Mary Morris insisted that the atmosphere at the shelter resemble not a hospital, but a comfortable boarding house for ladies. Here, no one forced the women to perform heavy physical labor or wear identical uniforms. Medical care at Kentishtown was of the highest standard for its time. A doctor visited the residents regularly, and specialized staff cared for those who could no longer move about on their own due to illness. The cozy garden surrounding the building allowed the ladies to take safe walks in the fresh air, far from London's smog. The food was high quality and varied, completely eliminating the hunger that had plagued many of them for decades. It was a true oasis of tranquility where one could spend the final years of life with dignity. However, not everyone who wished to could gain entry to this little corner of paradise. The building's capacity was strictly limited, and the number of applications exceeded the number of available rooms by a factor of 10. Every spot in the home was worth its weight in gold, and a real, unseen drama unfolded over the right to occupy it. Applicants had to meet strict criteria regarding age, professional experience, and an impeccable reputation. David Lang personally verified all recommendations to rule out any attempts at fraud by unauthorized individuals. This shelter became not just a building, but a monumental symbol of humanity's triumph over economic expediency. The women living here regained their voices, their dignity, and the right to a peaceful old age without fear of tomorrow. They read books, played music, wrote memoirs, and enjoyed the company of their peers. But how exactly were these precious spots allocated among thousands of those in need? The question of how candidates were selected opens the most controversial chapter in the history of this charitable organization. What goes on behind the closed doors of charitable foundations often resembles a cutthroat political race. The allocation of places at the Kentishtown home and the awarding of lifetime annuities took place through a complex voting system. Donors to the fund received special ballots, the number of which depended on the amount of their financial contribution. Twice a year, public elections were held in a large rented hall where the fates of dozens of desperate women were decided. On the one hand, this system encouraged wealthy people to donate more. On the other, it turned charity into a cold lottery. The candidates had to run full-fledged election campaigns, sending letters to thousands of potential voters. Elderly, sick women spent their last savings on printing promotional cards, summarizing their tragic stories. In these texts, they listed their medical diagnoses, loss of sight, paralysis, and the deaths of all their relatives, trying to elicit as much pity as possible. Mary Morris noted with bitterness that this process often humiliated the petitioners no less than the rejection by their former employers. For those who lacked influential patrons or money for postage stamps, their chances of success were virtually nil. The voting system meant that many women participated in the elections for years, suffering defeat time and time again. After each vote count, the hall filled with the tears of those who realized that another cold winter without means of support lay ahead of them. David Lang tried to alleviate the situation by setting up relief funds for the losers, but this money did not last long. The elections had become a brutal cross-section of Victorian society, where even the right to survive had to be won through competition. This bureaucratic machine ran smoothly, but it left deep scars on the souls of those involved in the process. Recognizing the system's flaws, the foundation's founders began seeking ways to combat not only the consequences, but also the causes of this widespread poverty. They realized that charity alone could never meet the needs of all those affected by an unjust hiring system. A fundamental change in the status of the profession was needed so that women could dictate the terms of the labor market themselves. In the next chapter, you'll learn how Mary Morris's brothers and colleagues brought about a true revolution in education. I'm going to reveal the best-kept secret behind the success of 19th century educational reforms. In 1848, David Lang, together with Mary's brother, Frederick Denison Morris, founded Royal College on Harley Street. Their goal was to create the first official educational institution capable of issuing state-recognized educational certificates to women. They realized that the main reason for low wages was price dumping by unqualified individuals posing as educated companions. The introduction of rigorous exams and official diplomas was intended to permanently separate professionals from amateurs and protect the labor market. The college offered a rigorous academic program that included mathematics, history, foreign languages, theology, and literature. Lectures were delivered by leading professors from London universities who agreed to work for free to support this pioneering endeavour. Female students underwent a rigorous selection process, and exams were administered to the same high standards as those at men's educational institutions of the time. Possession of a Royal College diploma immediately elevated a woman's status in the eyes of potential employers. Now, a woman could reasonably demand a higher salary, citing her documented level of qualification. This was a monumental step toward the professionalization of women's intellectual labor. Mary Morris actively participated in developing ethical standards and practical guidelines for the college's future graduates. She taught them how to draft contracts properly, negotiate salaries, and stand up for their rights against aggressive employers. Royal College became not just a school, but a true union defending the interests of its members. Society was forced to acknowledge that women's education was not merely the ability to embroider beautifully, but a significant form of intellectual capital. The college's success triggered a chain reaction in the British educational system. Similar initiatives began to emerge in other cities, gradually setting new standards for women's vocational training. Certified professionals became the elite of the labor market, able to choose the best positions and dictate their own terms. This radically shifted the balance of power, enabling many women to avoid poverty in later life. Knowledge finally became a reliable safeguard against social decline and destitution. However, even the most prestigious degree could not solve all the problems related to human nature and personal animosity. Employers still held enormous power, and they exploited every loophole to manipulate their female employees. One of the most powerful tools of blackmail in the hands of employers remained a piece of paper on which everything depended. In the next section, we'll examine in detail how this tool shattered the lives of even the most educated women. A letter of recommendation was an absolute and indisputable passport to the world of respectable employment. Without it, a diploma lost its value. The owners of wealthy households were well aware of this dependency and unscrupulously exploited it to keep their female workers in slave-like conditions. The threat of being denied a favorable recommendation forced women to endure any insults, excessive overtime, and delayed wages. This form of paper blackmail was the perfect weapon of control, leaving no traces and not violating any formal laws. In her practice, Mary Morris regularly encountered victims of such manipulation. Often, employers would refuse to provide a reference simply out of spite if a woman decided to change jobs for a better work environment or higher pay. In other cases, the letter contained veiled hints at a difficult personality or unsociability, which instantly deterred new employers. It was impossible to prove slander, since the word of an aristocrat always carried more weight than that of a hired servant. A single defamatory letter could undo decades of impeccable service and permanently close the doors to respectable households. To dismantle this corrupt system, the Institute for the Assistance of Governesses opened its own free employment agency. Mary Morris and her colleagues took on the role of independent arbiters, collecting and storing references in a secure registry. They personally contacted former employers, strictly demanding objective evaluations and quashing attempts at unfounded slander. The agency became a guarantor of integrity, where a woman's reputation was judged by her actual merits, not by the whims of her former employers. This dealt a serious blow to the aristocracy's monopoly on controlling people's destinies. The Institute's registry quickly gained trust in the labour market thanks to its rigorous and impartial fact-checking. Employers known for their poor treatment of staff ended up on the agency's unofficial blacklist. It was extremely difficult for them to find new qualified female employees, as Mary Morris warned candidates about the potential risks. This system of mutual oversight forced many employers to rethink their attitude toward the people who depended on them. The balance of power began to shift slowly but surely toward fairness and professional respect. Despite all these successes, the London job market remained oversaturated, and there simply weren't enough jobs to go around. In the face of fierce competition, it was incredibly difficult to find a decent job, even with perfect references. Economic reality demanded completely unconventional and radical solutions to save thousands of women from the looming crisis. It was then that a project appeared on the horizon, promising a fresh start on the other side of the globe. In 1861, Maria Rye, continuing Mary Morris's work, founded the Society for the Emigration of Middle-Class Women. The British colonies in Australia, New Zealand and Canada were facing an acute shortage of educated people to build a new society. Knowledge, organisational skills and European manners were in high demand there, and local farmers and officials were willing to pay a fortune for them. Emigration became not just a way out of the crisis, but a unique opportunity for complete financial and social liberation. The Emigration Society took on all the logistical and financial challenges of this dangerous transoceanic journey. Women were provided with interest-free loans to purchase tickets, helped to pack the necessary luggage, and ensured a safe escort during the journey. Maria Rye maintained extensive correspondence with the colonial authorities, ensuring that upon arrival, every participant in the program would be met and provided with work. This eliminated the risk of finding oneself alone, penniless, in a completely unfamiliar, harsh world at the edge of the world. The program became a lifeline for those who could not find their place in the overcrowded and snobbish London. The journey across the ocean took several months and posed serious risks to both physical and mental health. However, letters arriving from Sydney and Melbourne proved that this enormous risk was well worth it. In the colonies, the status of an educated woman was incredibly high, and wages were several times higher than those in London. Here, there was none of the rigid class hierarchy that stifled them in their homeland, and they could sit at the same table with their employers as equals. Over time, many of these female emigrants opened their own schools, purchased land, and became respected members of the new colonial society. The success of this program forever changed the demographic landscape of the British overseas territories. The women brought with them not only knowledge of geometry and French, but also European culture, literature, and standards of intellectual life. They became the foundation upon which a new generation of the colonial intelligentsia was built, free from the old London prejudices. Maria Rye personally oversaw the fates of hundreds of women sent abroad, delighting in their letters accompanied by photographs of their own spacious homes. This bold project proved that a change of geography can be the most effective remedy for social hopelessness. This large-scale exodus of educated professionals forced British employers to finally recognise the value of their female employees. The London labour market responded to the outflow of specialists by raising salaries and improving contract terms. The efforts of Mary Morris, David Lang, and Maria Rye converged into a single historical current that forever changed the rules of the game. We will summarise the specific outcomes of this long-standing struggle at the twilight of the Victorian era in the final chapter of our investigation. In 1849, Mary Morris published her famous book, which became a manifesto for an entire generation of educated working women. In this work, she did not ask for pity or charity. but rather made a reasoned demand for professional respect and legal protections. The book caused a sensation in literary and social circles, forcing society to take a hard look at its own prejudices. Mary's journey from a humble researcher to an influential social reformer reached its logical and triumphant culmination. Thanks to her tireless energy, the Kentishtown Relief and Shelter Institute gained a solid financial foundation that ensured its operations for decades to come. Hundreds of women were saved from the horrors of workhouses, gaining the right to a peaceful old age in comfort and dignity. Royal College graduated thousands of certified female professionals who formed an entirely new class of independent intellectuals. The system of recommendation-based blackmail was dismantled thanks to the creation of a fair and transparent employment registry. Women's intellectual labor ceased to be viewed as a service performed out of necessity by failures, transforming instead into a respected and protected profession. Mary Morris herself did not live to see the ultimate victory of the 20th century feminist movement, but she was the one who laid its foundation. Her decisions, organizational strategies, and methods for shaping public opinion were decades ahead of their time. She proved that even under the harshest conditions of class segregation, it is possible to create a functioning system of social protection without the involvement of the state apparatus. Her life became a symbol of quiet, yet incredibly effective resistance that broke down old foundations, not on the barricades, but in offices and conference rooms. Victorian England was changed forever thanks to the tenacity of one woman who refused to accept systemic injustice. By the end of the 19th century, the image of the intimidated, aging freeloader awaiting eviction began to rapidly disappear from London's reality. She was replaced by a self-assured professional with a degree, a bank account, and a clear understanding of her rights. Workhouses still existed, but their doors were closed forever to those who had dedicated their lives to intellectual work. The laws of the market had changed. Now employers were competing for the best female professionals, offering them lucrative contracts and retirement savings. It was a victory of common sense and human dignity over a centuries-old tradition of social oppression. The story of Mary Morris and her colleagues is a magnificent example of how solidarity and organizational talent can defeat even the most heartless system. They went from despair in cold rooms to establishing their own institutions that changed the laws of an entire empire. Their legacy consists not only of the lives of their contemporaries that were saved, but also of the foundation of modern labor law, which protects professionals today. Human will proves stronger than any economic crisis or prejudice, demonstrating that the future always belongs to those who are ready to fight for it. We have traced the incredible journey of an entire generation of Victorian women from complete vulnerability to the attainment of professional dignity. This is the story of how Mary Morris, David Lang, and their allies managed to halt the conveyor belt that was sending brilliant minds into the grim walls of state workhouses. They created a unique ecosystem of protection, from the shelter in Kentishtown to King's College and global emigration programs. Mary Morris reached her final destination not merely as a witness to her era, but as the architect of a new social reality where intellect was no longer a reason for enslavement. Ultimately, the viewer sees not just a series of dates, but the triumph of human solidarity within the soulless economic machine of the 19th century. Which part of this historical drama struck you the most? The horror of the workhouses, the bureaucracy of charity, or the courage of the female emigrants? Share your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to suggest topics or historical eras you'd like to learn about in our next videos. Your feedback helps us uncover the most hidden and surprising stories of world history. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our new in-depth investigations.